Hi, welcome to another episode of the Panachecast. Today I'm flying solo from the Panache Software team, but not to worry because we've got an exciting guest for you. We're going to continue our series of interviews with legal experts and experts in the legal market, this time with a focus on innovation. We have Bill Novomisle, who is General Manager at Korum Legal. We'll get into what Korum does, but first let's get straight over to my conversation with Bill. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you. Before I give you the floor to talk about yourself, I just want to canter through some points that I picked out from your profile and I think people will find interesting about you. You're a former litigator turned operations specialist, experienced in private practice and in-house with experience at TD Bank and PepsiCo, and international with experience of having worked in Hong Kong, China, India, Canada, and the US. So I don't know if you can say that you've done it all, but I suspect you're about as close to that as we can really say, as we can hope for. So do you want to take us through a little bit about you and your background?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a recovering lawyer. As you pointed out, I am an operations, technology, and innovation specialist, only focusing on legal services. So I've looked at this from the in-house perspective. As you pointed out, I was the global director of legal operations at PepsiCo, and I did some external counsel management stuff at TD Bank. I've looked at this from the law firm perspective. I've been a pricing director, and I've been a consultant in new law as well. So I've looked at it from the sort of emerging legal services supply chain. And right now, I'm the general manager for process and technology at Korum Legal, where we offer technology consulting and process improvement consulting advice as fiduciaries for our clients. So we're not a law firm. We work with law firms as well as in-house legal departments. We don't have any financial relationships with any legal tech providers. So we offer neutral, objective advice as to the best solution for their needs. And we have a proprietary process improvement methodology that we can use to drive efficiency and efficacy in the way that legal services are being delivered, leveraging off of lean principles, Six Sigma principles, and agile principles, but adapted and repackaged so that they are focused on the legal service delivery model.
Great stuff. We had a chat before we started recording about difficulties with people being in offices, especially in today's climate. And the agile stuff is probably particularly relevant for people if you take that to be the ability to work remotely and uninterrupted. Before we just get into a bit more details to what Korum's doing, you mentioned the recovering lawyer bit. What made you transition from being a fee-earning lawyer into a more consultancy role? How did you do that? What was that about?
Yeah, I think that when I was at the law firm, I was a big law litigator in New York City. And I was not what I affectionately refer to as a K through JD. So I had taken 6 years off and had worked before I went to law school. And I think when I was working, there was a lot of talk about efficiency and there was a lot of talk about being cost conscious and thinking through budgets and spend and resource allocation. And then I sort of, went to law school. I wanted to litigate. I landed, dream jobs in big law in New York City. And everything was driven by inefficiency.
Yeah.
Everything was all about, maximizing the amount of time that we spent on all of the files. And the mantra and the attitude was always leave no stone unturned.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, and I raised this with partners, and their view was you would only engage with the type of firm that I was practicing at if that was the level of scrutiny and attention to detail that was required. But I oftentimes felt that the majority of legal services didn't need to be done that way.
Yeah.
and that there was a lot of inefficiencies that was baked into the process, but there was no reward for cleaning them up. Leveraging any technology that was more sophisticated than email, there was just no upside to it. But that said, I didn't think that I would go into this path. I always figured that, when I decided to go in-house, I figured that I was going to manage litigation in-house at a big corporation, and that was sort of the traditional paths for rusty litigators that didn't want to be standing up and doing motion practice and taking depositions anymore. What happened was a partner at the firm that I was practicing at was the one who raised the opportunity at PepsiCo to me and said, they've got a new general counsel, and they've got this new position, and they're looking for somebody to really bring some business discipline to their legal department. And it was a large legal department with a lot of complexity and a big internal budget as well as a big external budget. And I was fascinated by this. I'd never heard of legal operations. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know that these sorts of roles existed. And I think at the time that I took it, I was definitely not the first person on the planet to take on this role. But from the best reconnaissance I can obtain, I was probably among the first, say, 24 people to be doing legal operations at a director level in a big corporation. And this is long before the founding of Clock. This is after the founding of the first few legal AI companies, but before most of them had actually gone to market with a commercialized MVP. So this was really early days, right? Like nobody was working with Kira or Raven or Seal. We were figuring things out from square one. But I'm thrilled that. But that said, like once I got into it and I started doing it, I loved it.
Yeah.
Right. I loved thinking about how incentives align between clients as well as their external providers. I love the technology aspect of it, the innovation aspect of it, the process improvement aspect of it, and I've never looked back.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot in that. I mean, the technology stuff obviously is flying now, and we'll come on to that a bit later on. But I suppose as that improves, the opportunities are there, the infrastructure is built by the likes of Amazon and Google and Microsoft and so on. The opportunities there are just growing and growing. But taking it back to the basic, more business operations side of things, presumably you go from a private practice where the incentive, as you say, is the almighty billable hour or chargeable hour, whatever your vernacular is, where actually it pays to be inefficient, at least back in maybe the 80s, where the lawyer was upheld as the oracle and not to be questioned. Nowadays, we've seen that change, and that change is not really new anymore. But nonetheless, there are still some practices which operate more in that way. They don't necessarily go in for the fixed fees if they can avoid it. But actually now on the on the in-house side, you need to understand you have a big budget, but it's still a budget, and you want to get the most out of that. So you're expecting more certainty for your spend, presumably. And I don't know whether you ever saw the billing guides from the firms that you were working with, but what we hear here often is, I don't want to pay for a Rolls-Royce service. I only need the Volkswagen.
Sure.
We just need the job done. It doesn't have to be all singing, all dancing, which I think is what you mentioned before. So you've presumably been there and got that and bought the T-shirt and so on. You've seen it all.
Yeah, but I think that is, I think that your point is well taken, and that is absolutely globally where I think the conversation has progressed to. I also think that the conversation needs to progress a little bit further. One of the things that I was, surprised by, it was sort of a eureka enlightenment moment, was when I switched to the law firm side and was working as a pricing director. And that is, you law firms have no qualms or hesitation in selling themselves, whether at the firm level, the practice group level, or at the individual practitioner level, as experts for whatever mandate that they're pitching or going for, because they've done it before, right?
Yeah.
However, you say, well, if you've done it before, how much does it cost? And they can't answer that question.
No.
And no one seems to feel that there's a particular tension between those two positions and statements, but I feel like there is. And what I realized when I was a pricing director, I would get clients all the time that were coming and were saying, we want alternative fee arrangements, we want innovative billing practices, we want. And I would do my best to deliver on those asks. But in order to do so, I would have to get into a lot of detailed scoping discussions: what was in, what was out, what was necessary, what was going to be handled in-house, those kinds of things. And oftentimes that's where the conversation broke down. And we weren't able to really get into the granular levels of scoping. And scoping in and of itself is a skill. And it is a skill that lawyers are not taught in their legal education. They are not taught it in their apprenticeships in private practice, and they're not taught it when they're onboarded in their first, second, or even third in-house role. And until scoping as a skill is learned by both the lawyers on the firm side as well as their purchasers, their buyers, their customers and clients on the in-house side, you're not going to really see an advent of alternative fee pricing and fixed fees that are really workable. Because it's not necessarily just about, I need a Volkswagen, not a Rolls Royce. It is, what is the actual scope? What are the deliverables? Because even your Rolls Royce lawyer, if they know exactly what they need to do, they can leverage the knowledge management and the precedents and the expertise housed within the firm to generally deliver at almost any price what the client needs. But there's a real challenge in articulating those parameters. Even when you talk to lawyers and you say, what are you working on? Lawyers don't necessarily articulate what they're working on in terms of the factors that influence pricing. They articulate it in terms of the things that make the matters interesting.
Yeah, sure. Is that a problem then, do you think, with the way that maybe the progression of lawyers works within firms? If you stay within private practice, you learn the job, you learn how to do the job and what's entailed in it. So you might get within your first half a dozen years a very clear picture of what the scope might be, but you aren't necessarily at the managerial level where you understand the pricing, the profitability, the cost parts of that aspect until you get into the partnership range, at which point maybe you're managing the team a bit more, and you're sort of pushed out to the top of the group of people that are doing the work. Do you think that might be one of the systemic issues that we have?
I think that at best, what you articulated is the best case systemic issue. In my experience, there's something even more insidious that's happening, and that is partners are going to their associates, or the senior associate that's on the cusp of partnership is going to the more junior practitioner and saying, you've got to do X, and you're allowed to bill Y hours for it.
Okay.
And so what the junior lawyer is internalizing through that is that's how you manage a file to a budget.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and you know they're sort of working to a particular number, right? So if I got to get to that number, maybe I need to double check those reps and warranties one more time, make sure I didn't miss anything.
Yeah.
These kinds of things, and I think that there's flex, right? Like everybody can work at 80%, 100%, or 120%, depending on the need. Um, and I do think that starting at legal education all the way through the apprenticeship, if we're really going to break out of this model, we need to empower all practitioners with a different skill set so that they're thinking about the service delivery model in a different way.
Yeah, that seems a fairly fundamental change that needs to come in then, right the way through training programs, knowledge management, maybe even the universities that are teaching the people entering into the profession. Yeah, we have apprenticeships becoming quite a big thing over here in the UK. Is that something that you're seeing across the legal world, apprenticeship schemes?
Yeah, I mean it's usually dictated by local bar requirements for attorney admission, but it's certainly a very common way. But even if you don't have a formal apprenticeship, your first job when you're first year, second year, third year, you're fundamentally operating as an apprentice. You don't know your head from a hole in the ground, and you're just taking instruction and doing as you're told and learning by doing, which is not a bad way of learning. It's one of the most effective ways of learning, but it's effective for learning good habits as well as less good habits.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that sort of depends on who your teacher is.
Yes. Absolutely.
Let's get into a bit of Korum then as to what you do. So one of the things I picked off of the website was people, process, and technology. Those are
Right.
three interesting taglines. What does that mean for me day to day?
Yeah, so I think that we are trying to offer a holistic solution to the market because overall our view of legal services is that they are too expensive, too confusing, and too opaque. So we want to bring clarity, transparency, and ease overall. So we didn't coin or originate this concept of people, process, and technology. It comes from a systems design, and it's 30 or 40 years old. But the idea is looking at legal services holistically. So the people that are involved in the service delivery and making sure that they have the necessary skills, the sufficient skills, but not necessarily excessive skills.
Yeah.
The process, how things are being done, with a real approach on defining and delivering value. I recall if you go back to the early to mid 2000s, everybody was spilling ink on what value in legal services meant. And I never got a particularly satisfactory answer out of any of the things that I read on that topic. And I think it's because you have to define value in the context of the specific service that's being provided. So whether that is M&A transactional support, or whether it is intellectual property pre-clearance for advertising and marketing campaigns, or whatever it is, you have to define your value and the value add that lawyers bring within that context of the process. And then finally, how does technology help in delivering that? Oftentimes when we do a process map, one of the first things that we do is we look for any step in the process that has a clearly defined trigger with actions that are taken in response to that trigger, whether it's one or a series of actions, but essentially have no judgment involved in taking those actions whatsoever. And anytime you've got a step like that, it should be automated.
Yeah.
because those are the steps that humans at best will do correctly as slowly. And if they're highly repetitive, humans will eventually introduce errors into those steps because we are human.
Yeah.
So, and then obviously technology can do a lot more than just these sort of automation, robotics sort of steps. But figuring out how does technology fit into that, which then goes full circle, because ultimately the technology is used by the people. So now you've got to consider adoption. And going beyond mere implementation, but actually integration of this technology into the work streams, whether it's minor robotic process improvements or it's a revolutionary new platform that fundamentally changes the whole ways of working within an organization.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, what do you see then? I mean, I don't suppose you can give a short answer to this, because you'll see some firms that haven't necessarily adopted any meaningful technology. You'll see, other than maybe Microsoft Outlook and email, as you said earlier. And then you'll see some firms that they have their own accelerator programs, incubation programs. They're almost miniature software houses themselves, in that they're bringing in expertise and paying for it out of their own pocket. Now, I see a sort of a divergence with those latter ones, in that they might end up developing a dozen or so different solutions to do different things, and maybe they end up with some integration issues. But what do you see broadly? I mean, do you see a big mix of strategies amongst firms out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that by and large, if we're talking about the law firm market, the law firm market is very interested in legal technology for back office functions, right? Because your firm operational, your time and matter management, your document management, these sorts of things are purely overhead expenses.
Yeah.
And the return on investment, the ROI calculation, is very straightforward, right? Yeah. On the in-house side, I would say that broadly speaking, you see different different jurisdictions starting at different points. In the United States, it's all about controlling external spend. So you're looking at e-billing platforms that are supported with matter management and grow into enterprise legal management. You go to Hong Kong or Singapore, you see much more interest in contract management.
Okay.
You go to Australia, you revert back to outside counsel management and matter management, without the e-billing piece. E-billing is not a must-have. It's a nice-to-have or an interesting add-on that they might do later on. But then you can see even much more fragmentation within there, right? So you see a lot of law firms that have recognized they can't get paid for first drafts anymore.
Sure, yeah.
So you have tools like Thomson Reuters Contract Express or other very basic document automation that just do first draft generation. However, those aren't selling, in my experience, as well for the in-house market, because the in-house market wants something that does a little bit further into the contract lifecycle management than just that first draft. They want something that goes through negotiation, that integrates with their document management system, and even automates ticklers for renewals or things like that.
Yeah, well, they've got a whole business to manage, haven't they? They're interested in dates. They're interested, I guess, in consistency across their documents and that sort of thing. And I can see the limitations, certainly, with the document automation. Although one thing I think maybe firms don't necessarily realize is that they can recoup some of their costs back, perhaps, of buying those packages, which may not necessarily be the cheapest, and may deliver a sort of limited phase one outcome. They don't do anything beyond producing the initial draft, but actually they can allow their clients to use those tools themselves and potentially make a charge to their clients for the ability to use them. I've certainly heard of some firms doing that.
I think that that's absolutely right. I have seen firms that have automated full contract lifecycle processes for external clients,
Yeah.
and they have charged a all-in, negotiation, draft through negotiation through execution,
Mhm.
all-in flat fee price, which the client has loved because it gives them certainty when they're entering into a certain type of transaction, what their legal spend is going to be on it.
Yeah.
And I have seen from the firm side, profit margins actually increase
Mm.
even after you include the cost of the technology because the efficiency gains are so great
Yeah.
that even after you factor all these things in, but it's a different revenue model.
Yeah.
What you're selling is a product at that point. And the way you make money on products is different than the way you make it when your inventory is time.
Yeah, sure. But you're providing the advisory part of it, I suppose, is included to a degree within the automation. It isn't necessarily as you go along and how it might have traditionally been. I was very interested also in what you said about the different cultural spins on things
Mm,
and the requirements. We've seen ourselves that even the concept of the cloud in some places is more acceptable than others. So in the UK and the US, it seems to me that people are very comfortable using cloud-based solutions. In Europe, in particularly Austria, Switzerland, we know that those things are verboten. So, do you see any limitations like
I've
that?
actually had companies that are headquartered in Switzerland insist that the keys at rest are stored on their local server,
Okay.
which is an extraordinary request and is extremely, it's not technically impossible, but it's not the way that cloud-based services are usually architected.
No.
And it's very expensive and can be very burdensome. So I think that that is slowed
Yeah.
adoption in other jurisdictions. So we definitely see certain of this. My view is, cloud is ultimately going to be the way and where everybody ends up.
Yeah.
um, but how we get there will be uneven.
Yeah, sure. Does that mean, do you think that there are maybe, at the moment at least, better opportunities in some jurisdictions like the US and the UK for legal tech startups, for example, because the regulation authorities and the wider authorities are more open to things like cloud and have maybe a less intrusive governmental stance?
I think that uh, the effect is felt a little bit further downstream.
Okay.
And this ties back to a point that I think you were alluding to a little bit earlier. And that is point solutions versus more omnibus enterprise solutions. I think that, in the United States and in the parts of Europe that are more amenable to cloud-based solutions, is where you have seen the largest amount of activity in consolidation and integration into end-to-end systems. So if you and I don't mean to only talk about Thomson Reuters products, but if you look at like the High Q platform,
Yeah.
what it does and what it's able to do in terms of being a series of modules that offer a lot of different point solutions under one omnibus umbrella, that's much easier to implement because it's a cloud-based solution in the jurisdictions that have that. What
Yeah.
I've seen in ASEAN and in South Asia in particular, where you have a lot of fragmented jurisdictions and either cultural opposition or regulatory impediments to cloud based solutions, is a lot more point based solutions.
Okay.
that are thinner and therefore can be installed locally. And that, but that in and of itself is going to lead to issues down the road, because once you've got 15 point solutions, your user experience is a nightmare.
Yes.
Right. And now you've got all of these separate silos of data, and you can't really get business intelligence and analytics, and you either have to create another data warehouse or did it,
Yeah.
but that issue in these smaller jurisdictions, where I've seen a lot of like entrepreneurship and activity and growth, those more systemic issues from the client's standpoint haven't fully ripened. So I don't know if we see that ripen in 5 years or 10 years, but if I'm going to play Nostradamus, that's where I see it going. And eventually the clamor from the clients will hit to the point where regulatory barriers will start to fall, or people will develop another workaround.
Yeah, sure. I know that some regulatory authorities are actually keen to work with the technology community and the law firms themselves to try and reduce some of the friction points they might otherwise have. So they're very much in the game, so to speak, and involved, which is good. And here, the Law Society and the Solicitors Regulation Authority, they actually have innovation people there, I think, looking at ways that they can make things work a bit better.
And I think that that's part of the reason why you've seen the number of incubators in the UK that you have, is you have a very friendly and open and thoughtful regulatory environment, and that's allowed the ecosystem to flourish.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, or maybe I mentioned and then you mentioned Australia, but we covered a lot of Eastern Asia, and we've covered a bit of North America, but we haven't said that you're present here. Although I certainly know you have some people in the UK. What's your do you come to the UK? What's your offering here for people?
Yeah, so Korum Legal absolutely has an office in the UK, and our tagline there is Gateway to Asia,
Yeah.
where we see ourselves is the entry point for businesses that want to expand their operations into this part, the North Asia or South Asia part of the world.
Yeah.
That said, we are full service, and in the UK, we do offer all of our process and technology consulting services. And we're working with some clients that are headquartered in the UK, but what they have realized is they want to implement some legal technology, they want to innovate, and when you think about it in terms of complexity, Asia Pacific has your maximum amount of complexity, in that you probably have a lot of jurisdictions that you're doing business in. You're doing work in Hong Kong and Singapore and Malaysia and Thailand and Vietnam and others, Philippines, Indonesia, etc. While simultaneously, compared to your home headquarters standpoint, you probably have your smallest number of lawyers situated out in Asia Pacific. You may have one hub in Sydney or one hub in Singapore or Hong Kong or wherever it may be. So if you're looking for a sandbox to test and stress test legal technology, this is the part of the world that gives you maximum complexity with a minimum change management curve.
Okay.
So we're starting to see more clients from the UK start to say, well, let's actually test something out over there, but make sure that whatever we test is a solution that is scalable on a more global basis as well. And the reality of it is, a solution that works in the UK will work over here if it's configured properly. but we also offer services around virtual lawyering, or even ad hoc general counsel services for that company that may be looking to expand out into Asia, but doesn't want to hire their first full-time GC out here or set up an independent legal function. We can
Sure.
provide sort of the flexible staffing while you're getting operations stood up to help in that regard. So yeah, absolutely. UK is a very interesting and fruitful market for us.
Yeah. So you're doing stuff for private practice. You're doing stuff for in-house too. You see both sides of that still. That's great.
Mhm.
Um, if I'm a CIO or a CTO at a law firm now, that's relatively, or an innovation manager, there's a relatively new posts within the law firms over here. I'm tasked with improving the use of technology, the efficiency of the business, but I don't really have anywhere to start. Any thoughts or suggestions as to where I might start? I mean, I can pick up the phone to you and have, what might be my first few steps just to get going?
Yeah, so I think that the first place that you've got to start is you've got to figure out the culture that
Mm,
you're operating within and what is driving it. I talk about three different approaches. So one is the top-down approach, in which your general counsel or your managing partner has a vision and you're working towards that. Then, if that's your starting point, then if that's the driver behind the creation of your position and what you were doing, then what you've got to think about is, where do I start that where I can rationalize it as part of this story of building towards that, right? So if the idea is we're ultimately going to be a fully automated law firm, then what you need to start doing is building in these client service portals or things like that that starts gathering in client behavior, handling conflicts, but it's also providing relatively easy services at defined prices, and also identifying purchasing behavior and starting your data analytics program around that. Another reason you may be working is, or the reason your position was created, is because there's a bottom up problem, and that
yeah.
is the pain point approach. So we've got this particular practice area and they're under extreme pressure around realization. They're under extreme pressure on utilization, and we've got to turn it around. So we want you to work with them to start with,
Mm,
to sort of fix that. Well, that tells you where you want to start. You start by focusing on that pain point, but you want to keep your eye on solutions that can then be replicated around other practice areas, other departments, or if you're in-house, other things. One of the things I've said before is, only a lawyer will talk about a contract as a category. If you're in-house, you may be starting out with the pain point of your employment agreements, but you should be keeping an eye on, well, what are procurement's needs, what are sales needs, what are strategic alliances needs, because ultimately contracting is going to be rolled out much further than what you're focused on. And then other folks may find themselves in role because people take the sideways approach and they're looking at things holistically across people, process, and technology, or however they want to phrase it in terms of overall operational efficiency. And there, you've got to take the sort of holistic approach. And you may still start small, but the way you position it and pitch what you're doing and why you're doing it is with the idea of ultimately driving operational efficiency across all of the levers of your your client or your entity.
yeah.
So uh, because and the reason I advocate this approach is, at the end of the day, implementation is easy, adoption is hard.
Yeah.
So starting with your people and what perspective they're coming from,
Mm.
Even if it doesn't fundamentally change the technology or the initiative that you start off first, it will recharacterize how you position what you are doing. And that's how you start to build your stakeholder consensus that will ultimately lead to adoption and transformation and innovation and all of the good things that you're enrolled to deliver.
Yeah, I suspect, I guess, that most people are operating on that second one that you mentioned, the bottom-up version, seeing pain points, fixing pain points, whether that's with, a new precedent suite, a new process, procedure, a small app that's been built in-house to handle a particular thing, and then this doesn't necessarily flow through to a much bigger, smoother service in the end. There are lots of just band-aids or plasters over little cracks that don't ultimately fix the foundational issues. So I think you're absolutely right that involve the people early, and hopefully you get a much better outcome.
Sure. I
Yeah.
mean, like the innovator that came up with the Do Not Pay app
Yeah.
for fighting parking tickets. It's a
Yeah.
great app, but it's not going to supplant like the family lawyer practitioner.
No.
Because you don't want an app for everything that bothers you. So the bottom up approach is important, but you got to keep the longer term vision in mind, even if that's not how you're selling it in your own head. You've got to keep that present.
Absolutely. Great. Well, Bill, we've come to pretty much an hour, which is actually slightly longer than we planned to go, but that's what happens when the conversation goes well. So thank you for coming on. And if people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that, and who should be getting in touch?
You can always visit us at korumlegal.com, and my full contact information is available there. It's just my full name, bill.novomisle at korumlegal.com, but just KORUMLEGAL, and that's where you should go.
Great. Hopefully you'll get a lot of responses from the UK and an opportunity to come and visit once the coronavirus has disappeared.
Once these travel bans are lifted, I will be on a plane. I can assure you of that. And Neil, thank you so much for the invitation. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Likewise. Thanks, Bill. Bye.
Cheers.